Welcome to the Doomscroll News Report here on Radio Taiwan International, where I, Amanda Stevens, and my co-host,
Hanna Belinsky,
two writers, political by necessity, cover some of the biggest international news stories dominating our news feeds from the last week. I'm Amanda Stevens, and this week we're tackling, well, first, yet another youth protest, which has broken out in Madagascar this time. And then we'll be looking at changes in the Israel-Palestine situation now that the war has passed the 2-year mark just a few days ago as of recording. So a little bit of the bad with the good insofar as news this week. Honestly, truly, with both of these topics, I found them both to be like an interesting mixed bag of good news, bad news. I don't know how to feel news.
We love a mixed bag.
How are you this week, Hanna?
I'm tired, man.
Actually, we both said that repeatedly. Every time I've seen you this week, we've both been like, I'm exhausted. Me too.
It's just one of the, it's crazy because, you know, the news don't stop. So, like, days off mean nothing to us, you know, like per the national calendar, the holidays and stuff.
And that's crazy because we have had, this is a 3-day work week.
Yes.
Not for me.
It is.
You're also on the mama job.
All the time.
Never
24/7.
Yeah. You can get away from that to go to an office job.
God help me.
Yay. All right. Well, let's get into it then, because I sent this to you over the weekend because I was so, I guess I should say, intrigued when I saw this. I also want to say I did my best to look up the proper pronunciation of names in this one, and every single video that I saw pronounced them differently. So
yeah, we both are just going to do our best today.
Yeah, I've been calling this Madagascar's own Gen Z protest in my head, largely because the Nepal protests, along with some in Kenya, purportedly inspired these, at least partially. But the bigger reason for the protests is much lower on Maslow's hierarchy, namely that many in the island nation don't have consistent access to electricity and clean drinking water, but also that people experience blackouts of both. I didn't even know you could have a water blackout, but that's the case for them. So these have also been seen in the news as the blackout protests. There are a lot of striking similarities between this protest movement and others we've covered before. It was, at least originally, a largely youth-led initiative. The police cracked down extremely hard with rubber bullets and tear gas, purportedly killing 22 and injuring over 100, although the government denies these numbers. And it has led to the dissolution of the Malagasy government. But there are notable differences. Although the issue is one of basic human utilities, most of the ire of the protesters seems to be focused squarely on the president, with calls for him specifically to step down. Also, opposition leaders and trade unions have officially backed the protests, and the dissolution of the government actually inflamed protests for a while as it was seen as a surface-level fix, not actually fixing any of the problems they were upset about, and crucially not meeting their demands for President Rajoelina to step down. Apparently, the government dissolution didn't involve him. It was just everyone else. The most recent news, as of recording, is that the president has scheduled talks with the protest leaders and religious leaders as intermediaries, caving to an ultimatum by protesters last Wednesday, threatening a nationwide strike. So, Hanna, I know that this is a lot, but of the protests we've covered before, we've had one successful protest in Nepal and one ongoing in Indonesia. So I want to ask you what you think the chances are that these two sides will really be able to reach an agreement in these scheduled talks.
So I'm not particularly well versed in Madagascar's politics. I did some research. I tried my best. I would say, though, just from a logical point of view, that they're probably at an impasse right now because neither side seems to be willing to concede. The Gen Z protesters, for their part, they're kind of refusing to come to the table to talk at all because they just don't have any confidence in the government to take them seriously or to change anything. And I don't really blame them because, you know, they were shot at and tear gassed, and the government has so far only made symbolic concessions.
Yeah.
At the same time, though, Rajoelina's government doesn't seem willing to concede much at all either. So something's going to have to give on one or both sides, and I think it may be too early to call.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the fact that we started with the Nepal protest might give us a skewed perspective of how long protests like these typically take.
It was like a week, not even. Yeah.
Crazy fast. Minus 10 NT. Just
put it in the crazy zone.
Yeah, just an unheard of speed, almost unheard of speed. But something else that interests me about Madagascar's current situation is that the president, Andry Rajoelina, came to power in large part thanks to a similar protest and eventual coup back in 2009. Now, he hasn't been president since 2009. He served a transitional presidential role at that time until 2014. He took a brief break from the role before winning the 2018 election and then again in 2023. So he has quite a bit of experience being president. But something I stumbled across while looking into him, as you did, doing my own research on the situation, was that he originally won his very first election all the way in 2008 by forming the Young Malagasi's Determined political party. So how do you think it got to this point where somebody who was once so popular among the younger voting population is now almost the sole focus of these protests today?
So 2 things. One is, well, he got old. You know, he used to be the youth.
He's not the youth anymore.
Right, he's not the youth anymore. He used to be the youth. He's not the youth anymore.
It was at least 10 years ago. Almost 10 years ago.
This makes me think of those situations where, you know, someone starts dating someone who is already dating someone else. You know, they become the affair partner, and then that person they're seeing dumps their partner for them and they get together. But then years down the line, their relationship starts to fall apart. So it's like, first of all, you guys got together under pretty specious.
And in this, the president is the person who was dating.
Yeah.
Or is Madagascar the person who's dating presidents?
So
then takes.
let me get
okay,
it.
Let you finish. I'm sorry. Sorry.
It's like, okay, how could you have expected it to work out? With Rajoelina, the way he first came to power via a civilian coup was already pretty eyebrow-raising, you know, like dating an affair partner or dating the affair partner.
Okay.
But the fact that he remained in power, you know, Madagascar is the one who's dating him.
Okay.
And then you mentioned he stepped back, but actually it was only symbolically because he was still pulling a lot of strings from behind the scenes, just based on what I read about him. And then he came back to power. Like, clearly this guy has got something going on. He wants control. And he first became president through technically illegitimate means. And he's done everything to hold on to that power in some regard ever since. So I think it is really ironic that in 2009 he led the youth uprising, and now he is the guy that the youth uprising is trying to topple.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I think it really boils down to the fact that these people straight up do not have essential infrastructure like electricity and running water. Like,
an important statistic when I was looking into this is that between 70 to 75% of the population, I think, live in literal poverty.
Yeah, that's major.
Yeah, it's an insane amount of people to not have access to, again, your basic, especially in today's day and age, basic human utilities.
Exactly. Like, you can't not be having these things like 24/7. And I think that points to a serious failure on the government's part. And people should be taking to the streets about it because, I mean, what else are you going to do? It's not like you can hang out in your house. There's no power. I would go out in the streets.
What are you going to go get a drink of water? Probably not.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that is probably how it got to this point. Is you mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You know, the very basic needs
is really what I was thinking of when I was looking at that. Between that and the irony of the situation, those two things like really struck me. And totally. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I was wondering if it's like it feels like he's just completely lost touch with where the movement started.
It seems like what happened when he initially came to power poked holes in what was already a kind of unstable democracy that they were trying to develop. And so he really didn't help the situation along. I think
by taking power illegitimately.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that only further destabilized things, or at least did not set Madagascar up for success.
Yeah.
Correct. So
yeah. Well, and that was something we were talking about, and I'll move on after this, but that was something that we brought up when we were talking about the Nepal election, is that when you have a leader then after you depose a previous leader, and then you have a leader who is elected or chosen through non-traditional means or non-generally accepted means.
Right.
So, like, granted, it was a vote, but it was a vote on Discord. Which is pretty unusual. It sort of seems to take away from the legitimacy of it. And that also is just going to be something that's going to stick with that presidency for as long as it lasts.
Exactly.
Right? So I guess getting back to that, like, had it just been a purely transitional government, maybe we wouldn't be where we are. But I do remember seeing a lot of articles when I first started looking at this of the international community just not even agreeing with his term in that supposedly transitional but 4-year-long period at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Speaking of Nepal, it seems like more and more countries are experiencing protests, specifically of the anti-government variety. Just in the context of this show, we've discussed protest movements in the United States, Nepal, Indonesia, Madagascar, and we almost covered Thailand earlier this summer, not to mention the numerous pro-Palestine protests, the flotilla resistance movements we've seen over the last year, and we haven't even had time to cover the French and Japanese government dissolution and the anti-government protests in Kenya 2 months ago. And not to forget our neighbor, South Korea, which just about a year ago had a tumultuous 24-hour failed coup attempt.
Has it already been a year? Good Lord.
Doesn't it feel? It wasn't quite a year, but I remember it was like winter.
Wow.
So we're coming up on that as well.
Yeah.
And all of these are just the ones that are top of mind for me right now that I know of, that I like remember discussing or almost discussing, near discussing. So I wanted to end this segment with a little meditation with you about the driving factors behind what seems to be a time of global unrest and protests in response to that.
I love this question because I think it's really worthwhile for everyone to consider why people, especially young people, are protesting right now. Amanda, have you heard of this concept called the runaway world? So the runaway world is this idea coined by English sociologist Anthony Giddens regarding the process of globalization. And it describes his view that the processes driving modern change has created levels of risk and uncertainty that have become too complex for people and political leaders to really control. So basically, everything is so interconnected now because of globalization and in such complicated ways that changing this thing over here can change that thing over there and vice versa.
It's like the butterfly effect movies.
Yes, exactly. Now, I don't necessarily perfectly agree with this idea because I think it's really dangerous to submit to the notion that everything is out of control and to give up agency. But I think people are starting to have a sense that the world has, in effect, run away from them. You know, everything feels big and complex and difficult to change or improve now. And it, speaking for myself as an American, it feels like no one has really gotten what they wanted in a really long time. I think it has become really hard to make anything materially better for ourselves. And I think these protests speak to that sort of chronic disappointment that we've all been living in. So if you think about it, I mean, a lot of people who voted for Trump aren't even getting a better lifestyle. They're just getting the satisfaction that they've made life worse for others. So I think that's what things have come to, this kind of crabs in a bucket mentality. I got mine, or at least I don't got mine, but I'm going to make sure you don't got yours.
Everybody else should suffer the same way that I suffered.
And I think that's the kind of negativity people are living with now. And I think everyone is just really unhappy.
I also, when I was like writing this, I was thinking of something that we read when we were covering the Indonesia protests, talking about the fact that because so many people today have cell phones, a student youth leader, he used the word impatient for Gen Z. But I actually felt it as like a positive thing. Yeah, so connecting to what you're saying. And I think this is also almost proof of that. Since you can see change around the world and or a lack of change, you can immediately compare it to your situation. And I think just that Google kind of like, or go on social media of any kind. And there is something to be said for like what we can and can't trust about social media, but you can immediately see life in another country.
Totally,
I think that gives you some sort of idea about what life should be like for you in your country, or you see like another protest work, such as the Nepal case, and perhaps it inspires you to like, we did this once before, let's do it again.
People want better for themselves. Who can blame us? You know?
Not me. Not me. Speaking of wanting better, The Israel-Palestine conflict passed the 2-year mark last Tuesday, marking 2 years since the truly brutal October 7th attack. And so we're going to run through some numbers as to where we are. At that time, almost 1,200 Israelis, largely citizens, were killed, and 251 were taken hostage by Hamas forces. Of those hostages, 48 are still being held in Palestinian territory, only 20 of whom are thought to still be alive. This also kicked off the Israel-Palestine war, which has killed an estimated 67,000 Palestinians, about 10% of the pre-war population, and not including those who are still buried beneath rubble, or whose bodies just haven't been found. The war has also injured more than 169,000 Palestinians, resulting in an engineered famine, and has been declared to be a genocide against the Palestinian people. Other shocking statistics are that over 92% of residential and 88% of commercial buildings have been destroyed, and approximately 300 journalists have died and been killed in targeted attacks since the war began, making it more deadly for journalists than World War I and II, the Vietnam War, Korean War, and the war in Afghanistan combined. These numbers are according to reporting at Al Jazeera, and cite organizations such as the UN and UN-related affiliates such as UNICEF and the ICP, as well as World Healthcare Workers Watch and Brown University Cost of War Project. That last statistic reminded me that we're not exaggerating whenever we come on here and shout into the void about just how dehumanized that situation has become. Or is there anything that stood out to you now that we're past 2 years into one of the most publicly witnessed wars of the last century?
I'm not saying I'm numb to it.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, the numbers, the images of emaciated babies and razed buildings have basically been burned into my brain. Mm-hmm. But what managed to shock me all over again in recent days was noticing how much of the rhetoric Israel's leadership uses about Gazans mirrors the way Nazis talked about Jews. Mm-hmm. It's amazing to me that Israeli leadership is now so far removed from the idea of conceiving of Palestinian people as human beings. Like, they've really drunk the Kool-Aid, you know?
Yeah.
And I think it is a point of no return, honestly. I mean, almost all the infrastructure is obliterated. It's nigh unlivable. I mean, don't make me put more coins in the crazy jar.
Here's what I would say. We have said this before, but before we get into some breaking news that happened an hour before we came to record today, which I also feel like happens every time we do this, because it was a 2-year anniversary just this last week, a lot of news organizations, and for me, I saw the BBC's, and there was also some images by the New York Times, displayed some time-lapse pictures, and also like very good descriptive infographics, along with, again, time-lapse photos of just how damaging the war has been.
I really encourage everyone to look at like the before and after pictures. I really do.
Just don't think that it's capable for words to express the same thing.
You have to see
As you were just talking, I was kind of thinking, speaking of like all these journalists, it sort of feels like our Vietnam War in terms of like having to actually see it.
Totally.
But there is some potential hope on the horizon. We were going to take this time to talk about what has happened with the global Samud flotilla, which is really important and was an excellent outreach opportunity. They were treated absolutely abhorrently, but also, again, keyly, aid is not getting into Gaza, and this is yet another example of that. However, just before recording, we saw some news that at least the first of a 20-part plan proposed by the Trump administration has been agreed to by Hamas and Israel. So that's instead what we're going to pivot to talk about, a little bit about those ceasefire talks that led to this and that will have to continue before we get to that. As of, I believe it was Tuesday, ceasefire talks resumed, although indirectly and through Egypt this time. Per the BBC and AP, some parts of the 20-part peace plan, which was proposed by the U.S. and agreed to by Netanyahu, include the full release of the hostages and deceased in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, although the true number of Palestinian prisoners is in the thousands, according to that first document. It also includes a full disarmament of Hamas and a future government where Hamas does not take part, though it leaves the door open for future Palestinian statehood. That's what we know about the 20-part peace plan or ceasefire deal. Hamas and Netanyahu have both expressed that they wish to negotiate for the future of Gaza. I'm sure you can predict where the holdups in this plan are.
Gee, I'd wonder what will be a problem.
To do anything with Palestinian statehood?
Probably so.
Yeah, and that's kind of exactly where the holdup. So
yeah.
However, only about an hour and a half ago, Gaza and Israel agreed to the first part of the ceasefire deal. And so what this includes is an agreement to end the war. And the deal includes the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the enclave and a hostage prisoner exchange. This is all per Reuters. It's just coming out now, so the situation is probably different when you're listening to it on Monday as this comes out. But this is brand new to us here on Wednesday. Mm-hmm. Yes? Yes.
Today's Thursday, Amanda.
Oh, man. I'm just so tired. So the good news about this is that Israeli hostages may be released as early as Saturday, which, again, is truly good news, and that the country's military will complete the first part of a partial withdrawal from the enclave within 24 hours of the deal being sealed, according to a source briefed with the details. The signing of the agreement is expected to take place at noon Israel time on Thursday, according to the same source. That's again from Reuters. We should also mention that as this is also being reported, Israel has continued to bomb Gaza at the same time. So that is also still taking place. But do you think that this deal will stick? I know Israeli people and Palestinians are obviously hoping for an end to this war, for these things to be met. This seems like one of the most promising ceasefire plans that we've seen in a long time.
There was one before.
I was going to mention that as well, though. We have had sort of a fake out before with the temporary 1 month long ceasefire. I think it eventually stretched into almost 2 months before Israel decided to launch a full scale invasion.
It felt... I mean, this is kind of what they do. They Netanyahu specifically, he comes to the table and then he backs away from the table, and then he comes to the table and then he backs away from the table, and then he bombs wherever people are negotiating, and then he bombs this place and the other place, and then he bombs Iran for some reason, you know? So it's...
And then he bombs Qatar, which we also discussed, which is where the ceasefire talks had previously been taking place, which is why they're taking place in Egypt now.
Go figure. So do I think it'll stick? I'll say this. I find it interesting. It's interesting that U.S. President Donald Trump is trying so hard to make this happen just ahead of when they announce the Nobel Peace Prize candidates. I just think that is interesting, and everyone should consider that.
Taking it back to stuff you and I have discussed, something we've said many times is it's crazy that now we're talking about the U.S. again, but their involvement in this, I think, cannot be understated or overstated.
No. I mean, the bombs are made in the USA, baby.
The bombs are made in the USA. One reason that this discussion has been going so quickly and is expected to go so quickly is because there was a huge threat associated with it from the United States that if Hamas did not accept the deal, that Israel would be given the green light to finish the job in Gaza. Civilians who are also living there. But we've also discussed that Trump seems to view these wars that are ongoing, that are honestly bad for everybody.
No kidding.
As things that he can solve to gain clout. And previously, you and I discussed the fact that we thought this was a no-win situation for him. And it is interesting to see it arguably having the most back and forth.
I really think he is just... There was that bizarre clip of him some while ago of him saying he's not sure if he'll get into heaven. I really and truly think that in his enfeebled mind, that if he can somehow negotiate this peace deal or obtain the Nobel Peace Prize, he will receive a ticket into heaven. I really think he has kind of convinced himself.
That's his own logic.
I think that's what's going on in his mind.
Well, what I can say is that I do hope that it sticks for the sake of everybody involved.
We can hope.
And if it does, maybe we'll have better news to share next week, because that's all that we have for today's news report. A quick reminder that you can find all of our referenced articles in the show notes for today's episode. I'm Amanda Stevens.
I'm Hanna Belinsky.
Thanks for joining us on air today. Tune in tomorrow for more programs by Radio Taiwan International. And in the meantime, remember to stop scrolling and touch grass. We'll see you next week.